Hello, everybody. I will just wait a moment whilst I see you all filter in. Welcome. I hope that you are settled. You're having a lovely evening so far. Maybe even you've got your cup of tea ready to go. I've got my peppermint here. And I want to thank you all for choosing to spend a bit of your evening with Jake and me. Today, we're going to be talking about the TMUA. We are going to be talking about our strategies for success, some of our own approaches to admissions tests, and our experience from working with students just like you, and some reflections on what it was like personally for me to go through this process. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the prospect of having another maths test to do, another thing on top of schoolwork. But I can kind of hear my mother's voice slightly. I thought it was nagging at the time, but very helpful advice, which was to work on this little and often. And I have really seen that play out in student success over my sort of 10 plus years in guiding students. We actually worked with a student, an applicant last year who scored 8.9 in the TMUA. And his approach was to do more or less daily practice, but just short bursts, maybe 20 minutes at a time. Very, very few people get such a disgustingly good score as that. You absolutely don't need to. You don't need to be anywhere close to that in order to meet your goals. But I think it really does illustrate that little and often can help you work towards your goal. And so amazing that you're all here in May of application year. I'm going to introduce Jake in a moment, and Jake is going to share some of the technicalities of the TMUA. And we're going to start from the basics. I know that many of you will know those, but we want to ensure everybody's got comprehensive info. And then we will do some practice questions, which I think will be rather fun. By way of show of hands, and you can raise your hand by using the button at the bottom of your screen. Who here has done Maths Challenge, UKMT, or maybe a similar international equivalent of that? There are plenty around the world. Lovely. I can see so many hands going up. Amazing. And if you're a nerd like me, then you probably have enjoyed those tests, those experiences. I must say that that kind of test is very much like the TMUA and other similar admissions tests in that it's asking you to do some really tough problem solving, but with content that you're quite familiar with. And it separates those bright students who've remembered a method and those who have the art of problem solving down, which really does come from practice and experience. So I will hand over to Jake in just a moment. Let me just share a little bit more about Oxbridge applications. You're probably familiar with us. That's how you found your way onto this webinar. But we have been a leader in higher education advising since before this millennium, and we support all competitive UK universities. It's not just Oxbridge. We know that you're going to be applying for 5 that you're excited by. We work with very specialist tutors, just like Jake here, and we were informed by research and guidance by former admissions tutors, people who have really made these admissions decisions. And we're really proud that over our 27 years of working with applicants, over 10,000 of those students have been successful, which is absolutely incredible. This is me. I'm Alison. Not sure I introduced myself at the start, but anyway, I studied mathematics and philosophy. And since then, I have been in education consultancy. I'm now the director of Duke's Consultancy, which consists of these logos, these brands underneath. You don't really need to worry about that. We're here for Oxbridge. And this is my colleague, Jake. Do you want to say a few words?
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Jake. Nice to meet you all. So yeah, just a bit about my background. I guess I studied engineering at Oxford and graduated about 2 years ago now. I've got a lot of experience. So the last 3 to 4 years, I've been an engineering mentor and an admissions test tutor, supporting lots of students like yourselves with all sorts of the quantitative admissions tests like the TMUA and the ESAT. So yeah, today I guess I'm gonna give you all an introduction to the TMUA. We'll see some example problems later. We'll talk through kind of what it takes to be successful in this test and give yourself the best chances of success in your application to Oxbridge or any other universities that you're interested in.
Brilliant. So over to you, Jake. Tell us more about the TMUA.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, what we'll do in today's session, we have about kind of seven main things to go through, which will give you hopefully as much of an overview as you need to get started with the preparation for the TMUA. Yeah, we can get started straight away, but I guess those are the things we'll cover in today's session. Okay, so just a bit of background on what this test is, in case you aren't sure at the moment. But yeah, the TMUA is a pre-interview admissions assessment that is designed basically to test your mathematical thinking and reasoning skills. So it's used for courses that you apply to that have like a large mathematical component and that rely heavily on mathematical skills. So things like subjects like maths, economics, and computer science. It is taken at Pearson VUE test centres and it's administered by a UK-wide admissions test body that also does other admissions tests. You'll take it on a computer. It's all multiple choice, so that might be different as well to your A-level exams that might not be in this format. And it's a non-calculated paper as well. The main reason why universities get students to take admissions tests like the TMUA is basically just to differentiate between the candidates. So most candidates that apply to these top universities will have top scores. So this is just another component that they use to get a real sense of how good different applicants are and their problem solving ability and allow them to more easily differentiate between students. Okay. Yeah. So TMUA consists of two papers. So there's a paper one and a paper two. They're both obviously testing mathematical reasoning skills, but they're testing slightly different topics. So the paper one is called Applications of Mathematical Knowledge. Both exams are 20 questions, both exams are 75 minutes, and they both also count. So the score that you get at the end is combined from paper one and paper two. So there's 40 questions in total, and the whole test, I guess, takes you 150 minutes. The main difference between these two is the content. So the paper one tests kind of your AS level pure maths and higher GCSE knowledge, whereas the paper two is maybe something that you might not have seen before because it tests kind of logic and proof. We'll talk about that more later in terms of what that actually is testing, but it is unique. So you probably haven't seen things like what you'll see in paper two in your school curriculum. Yeah, both papers are equally weighted and you get 1 mark per correct answer. So I guess big tip here is not to leave any questions blank. So even if you end up not being able to finish in the time, you want to try to at least give an answer for everything because you might as well, since they won't mark you negatively for a incorrect answer. Yeah, so the timing and the time pressure is quite significant on the TMUA. So the theme that crops up a lot when students are explaining their difficulties or what they found difficult about the exam, it's the time pressure. So if you take the total time and you kind of divide it by the amount of questions, you end up getting 3 minutes and 45 seconds on average per question. Now, this doesn't mean you need to spend that amount of time on every question. Some questions will be harder, so you'll take longer. Some questions will be shorter and easier, so you'll be able to finish them quicker. But on average, that's how much time that you get. So you can go in any order, really. We'll see what the test platform looks like. But you might want to be thinking about this when you're thinking about how to deal with the time pressure. So yeah, the strategy you're going to use, like, are you going to answer all the questions in order? How will you decide whether to move on or not if you're struggling on a question? So yeah, it's a significant challenge, the timing, and it's definitely something to practice because a lot of students find that they can't finish the whole paper in time. And it also gives additional pressures on things like accuracy and kind of exam stress if you're running out of time, things like that. So the time pressure is a big issue and a big challenge to overcome. Okay, next slide. Cool. So we'll just talk about some of the universities that require the TMUA. So obviously, nowadays I think there's lots of universities that require the TMUA or that use the admissions test in some way to make a decision. Obviously, the main ones are Cambridge and Oxford. So for Cambridge, if you're applying for computer science, economics, or maths, they will require the TMUA. And for Oxford, if you're applying for maths or computer science or kind of the joint honours, so maths and computer science, that's also going to require the TMUA. Other universities are also will require it as part of the application. Imperial for these courses. LSE, so LSE only requires it for certain courses. So there's, I think, two courses, economics and econometrics and mathematical economics, that require it. And then, yeah, Warwick and UCL as well for certain courses. So you can see all the courses are mainly kind of the mathematical, economics, computer science sort of courses. It's also used at some other universities, so we'll talk about that in a second. But at other universities, it might not be required, but it could kind of give you a boost. And sometimes it even gives you like benefits. So in certain unis, I know that they give you sometimes a reduced offer based on your TMUA score, even if it's not required. So yeah, in terms of the optional university, so at LSE there's quite a few courses that don't require the TMUA, but the TMUA can help with your application. So these are all the courses where that is the case. And then yeah, you can see like some of the universities. It's definitely worth, depending on what university you want to go to, check the course requirements and see which ones require the TMUA, because obviously every university, different courses do it differently. But yeah, Durham, you can get a reduced offer if you score above a 6.5. And at Warwick as well, they also use it to determine or to sort through applicants. Okay. So yeah, I mean, from my experience of teaching and supporting lots of students with Oxford applications and applications to other universities like Imperial, I've taught a lot of Imperial students as well. I would say the TMUA, the score that you get gives you a lot of leverage in the application process. I would almost say that it's potentially the most important part of the whole application. Obviously, that and the interview. Everything else, obviously, is very important. Personal statement, grades are very important, but the TMUA is really what allows you to kind of differentiate yourself from all the other applicants. It's a strong predictor of getting an offer. Obviously, it's not the be all and end all. Like when you apply to university, they look at everything. But the TMUA and your score really does give you a big boost and a big boost in your chances. So you can see it at university, like at Cambridge, for computer science and economics, you can kind of see the comparison between what TMUA score like the average applicant gets versus the average offer holder. And you can see there's quite a big difference here. So yeah, universities looking at the admissions test scores because of obviously when they look at your academic results, the last exams that you've actually done. So your A levels, you'll have predicted grades, but the last real exam results that you had was your GCSEs. And a lot of applicants will have very similar predicted grades. So this is why the TMU it carries so much weight. It really allows you to, it gives you another way to like really stand out amongst your peers.
I guess also something notable here is that the average applicant gets like half points,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is something that will be really unfamiliar probably to everybody on this call, being probably an overachiever, whereas everybody taking this test is talented at maths. It kind of skews the applicant pool, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it is quite a hard exam, and obviously, yeah, it probably a lot of you will be familiar with like doing very well in maths exams. But yeah, as you can see, the average score is it's like half or 4.5 out of 9. So yeah, it's quite a hard exam, and I wouldn't necessarily be, especially when you first start your preparation, in on the first few exams, if you're getting kind of low scores or fours or fives or that sort of thing, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Obviously, then you can improve a lot on that score, but it's meant to be a difficult test. So don't think that you can't do it based on having a low initial score on your first few attempts. Okay, yeah, just some things about how to register. So you can find all this information online. But yeah, you basically go online to this website, make an account, and then once the booking opens, you can go and book your test. You'll be able to find a Pearson View Center probably nearby. Even if you're international, they have them kind of all over the world. So you'll probably be able to find a suitable one. I would really recommend adding the deadlines to your calendar. You don't want to miss these. So these are all kind of the key dates in terms of registering for the TMUA and taking it. So make sure that you kind of don't miss out. And it does cost. There are bursaries that you can apply for if you are eligible for those that make it free. But the average cost is £78 for UK/Ireland and 133 for international. Access arrangements also good to mention. So if you get any access arrangements at school, like extra time, you can get those in the TMUA as well. But you have to apply for them, and do definitely apply far in advance, just to make sure that you can get those if you need them.
It's not quite like booking a driver's test, but you really should get your elbows out and book in your test as soon as you know where you want to be testing, because they do fill up. We have had situations where people have to travel. It's not the best.
Yeah. So just some context, I guess, of the TMUA like on the day from what you're sitting. If any of you have taken your driving test, it is kind of similar in terms of the setup. So you'll probably recognize this. So you're in cubicles at computer. Um, and the TMUA test will be on the computer. You're not really allowed to take anything with you into the exam room, so you have to have an ID, and that's really all that you're allowed. You'll be given some scrap paper so to do your workings out, and sometimes it's a whiteboard. So I have heard from lots of my students who've taken the admissions test in this format. The format can catch you off guard. I've had lots of feedback. They didn't realize that they would be working on sheets of paper or these laminated sheets, and that kind of caught some people off guard. So just keep this in mind when you're practicing. And even when you get closer to the exam, I would say try to replicate as best as you can. Try to replicate the environment that you'll be in, and then you won't get caught off guard on the day. I'll show you the online system in more detail on the next slide. So yeah, you can actually go online right now and do a TMUA practice test, and you can get a sense for what the platform looks like. This is what it looks like. It's fairly simple. You've got buttons to kind of go to the next question and things like that. Most useful buttons, I would say, they're flag for review. So if you are not sure about a question and you want to come back to it, you can press that button there and it will kind of flag it. And then you can click the navigator and you can see all the questions. You can see which ones you've attempted. You can see which ones you've flagged. And that's a very useful thing to bring up, like when you're in the middle of the test. Okay, so in terms of the scoring, it's scored slightly strangely. Again, probably unexpected from what you'd be used to in A levels. But yeah, each correct answer gives you 1 mark, and then the marks are scaled. So essentially, they make sure that the median is always 4.5 every year, and also they make sure the 90th percentile is 7. So, and then everything else like that is scored from 1 to 9. I believe it's also in 0.5. So I guess the scores could be 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and so on. And then, yeah, they collect paper 1 and paper 2 scores into one value. There is obviously no pass or fail for this exam, but the higher that you get, the better chances that you give yourself in the application process. Something interesting to note as well. So a lot of my students, this was another feedback that a lot of students gave. They said when they came out of the TMUA that they couldn't compare really the questions with their friends because everyone got a different test. So they actually kind of randomize it. So when you go in the test, you'll get a random selection of the questions, but then they use this model to make sure that that the scores are representative. So if you get a hard paper and you think that your paper's harder than your friends and you think that that means that you'll do worse, I guess it doesn't quite work like that. They scale it so it's all fair all around. Yeah, so a lot of people always wonder like what you should actually be aiming for. Like if you want to give yourself a good chance of an offer at Oxbridge or at Imperial or any of those other top universities, it's generally thought that a score of 6.5 and above, so you can see the distribution of the scores. If you get a 6.5 and above, that puts you solidly in the top third of applicants, which is a very good position to be in. 7 is the top 10% of candidates. So I'd use this data in your mind and try to aim for kind of a 6.5 or around that. Obviously, it's not the be all and end all. So if you get a lower score, it doesn't mean you're automatically excluded. There are lots of people who get offers with lower scores based on other parts of their application. But again, as we spoke about before, if you really want high leverage in your application and you really want to give yourself the best chances, and also if you want to kind of take the pressure off the other parts of your application as well, getting a really good TMUA score is very good and very useful. Okay, so just a bit about the content that they actually test you on. So you'll probably be familiar with most of this content. As Alison said earlier, they're testing not necessarily like hard topics. Like the concepts and the topics are relatively straightforward. Even some things are from GCSEs. But they're forming difficult problems and they're testing your ability to solve difficult problems. So there is a detailed specification online. So I definitely recommend go to that, look at the entire spec, highlight everything, highlight anything so you're not sure about. But these are just some of the examples of some of the sorts of topics that come up and some things that maybe you've forgotten. It is actually so in these admissions tests as well, sometimes because they're testing GCSE knowledge, it's possible that you might have forgotten some things from GCSE that haven't come up again in A level. So it's important to kind of go back and look at those things as well, even though they might be more basic knowledge. All right, so paper two. Paper two is the kind of unique part that maybe is unfamiliar in terms of the content. So what they're testing here is logic and proof. So a lot of these questions, we'll see an example of this towards the end of the session. They are the type of thing where it's not necessarily like new content. You can kind of reason about these using your own kind of logical skills, but it definitely helps to really learn the kind of mathematical ways of doing these and the formal ways of doing these. There are notes that they publish. So the TMUA publishes a whole set of notes that go through all the skills you need for paper two. So if you look there, you'll be able to see all the content that they'll be testing on paper two. But essentially, what the type of thing that they're testing is whether you can interpret logical statements, whether you can kind of combine these logical statements, so using kind of ands, ors, nots. If you can evaluate like when statements are true, when statements are not true, and yeah, evaluating like the conditions that make things true. So necessary conditions, sufficient conditions. For the proof section, they would be wanting you to kind of develop your formal proof skills. So being able to do some of these basic, which these are things maybe that you have seen in A levels, but it's definitely worth kind of brushing up on them. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just one of the things that I find wonderful about paper two is by learning a few of these things, a small hand, like if you can wrap your head around converse and contrapositive, necessary and sufficient conditions, actually you unlock so much. But properly understanding these concepts actually is the first step, and it does actually give rise to the whole paper.
Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, there's lots of general skills that I think you can develop that really help you succeed in the TMUA. So these kind of are going to be helpful across all the papers, across the questions. So I would specifically, yeah, focus on developing some of these and improving them as you practice. So in particular, non-calculator arithmetic, we already talked about the time pressure and the fact that there's no calculator. That presents a problem for some people, and I'd say quite a few students struggle with like mental math and being able to do it quickly. So you have to be fast and you have to be accurate under pressure. Pattern recognition is a big one. So we'll talk about this as well in a minute, but lots of the questions, you need to find the quick way or you need to find the trick to doing it. There's often multiple ways of doing it, and some ways might be the first thing that you think of, but then that takes ages and that will just waste you a load of time. So you need to kind of train yourself through lots of practice to recognize all these small tricks and these innovative, efficient, like elegant ways of doing different questions. Obviously, it's a multiple choice, so you can also use you can strategically use those multiple choice options. So oftentimes I've taught students about how they can kind of if they just tried to answer the question and get the question kind of from first principles, it takes them ages. But if they actually look at the options, it's possible, number one, to like get rid of half of them already before you even start the question. And then normally with the remaining ones that are left, there's normally key differences between them. So you can ask yourself what makes these options different, and then how can I apply that to the question to maybe find another way to work out the answer without having to actually do the whole thing. Similar with the multiple choice, because you only have to select an option, this means you can use approximations and things like that. If your answers are sufficiently far apart, then you can simplify a lot of the mental math based on this. Graphical techniques are also useful. So in A levels, I guess you might be used to potentially having a graphical display calculator for certain papers. You can use these graphical approaches for a lot of questions. Obviously, you don't have the calculator, so you'll have to do sketches and things like that. But we'll see an example of a question later where it involves circles, and drawing a graph is a very efficient way to think about the logic behind the problem. And then, yeah, obviously time management. We've already talked about the difficulties with time. So time management, there's multiple skills involved in this. I guess there's the strategy, so deciding how you're going to tackle the paper. Are you going to do the easier questions first? Are you going to try to get as many marks and then go back to the harder ones? And there's also, and then if you get stuck, how are you going to decide when you move on? So that's one aspect. But then I guess it's also training yourself to be able to be quick. So with the non-calculator arithmetic and with being able to spot the patterns immediately, those all will also help you be quick. Um, yeah, so there's also some specific TMUA tricks. When I support students, I guess we go over a lot of these tricks and we go into a lot of depth on how to recognize different things, practice different common questions that come up, and go into how to find these elegant solutions and how to speed up. Okay, so yeah, in terms of let's just talk a bit about how to actually prepare for the TMUA and what I think makes good preparation. So obviously we've talked about a lot of these aspects of what people find the hardest, so the time pressure and the paper two in particular because it's unfamiliar, test center friction, those sorts of things. The key thing that most students say is that they past papers is obviously a really good way to practice, but also not just doing past papers, but reviewing them. So we'll talk about creating a feedback loop. So you want to do the papers, you want to evaluate all your mistakes and make sure that on each paper you're improving something, like whether it's one of the skills, whether it's your knowledge of a topic. And yeah, there are not too many past papers out there. There are lots of TMUA past papers, but they're from the old syllabus or the old format of the test, which is still very useful and still probably what you want to be practicing to practice for the TMUA. But because there's no official past papers or there's limited official past papers, the advice is to do lots of different forms of questions. So you can practice things like the MAT, the old Oxford test, the old TMUA papers, things like UK, MT, Olympiad problems, STEP. I've got a slide in a minute that lists lots of resources that you can use, so we'll go through that. Yeah, this is a key thing. I think Alison was talking about this earlier, but it's very much a skills-based exam, not just knowledge-based. So to train these skills and to be able to access the skills effectively in the exam, that this comes from regular deliberate practice, not just kind of cramming 2 weeks, 1 week before the exam. So the content itself, you probably already know it, but it's these skills that you have to build up, which take time. So yeah, 100% regular and deliberate practice is the way to go. Yeah, so if I was going to suggest to all of you what would be a good way to prepare, I'd probably go about it like this. So I think the fact that you're all on this call is great because it means that you're already thinking about the TMUA and you have lots of time now. I think how much time? I think it's probably like 4 or 5 months. It's in October, obviously. So you've got a lot of time now to prepare, and I would use the summer. So use the summer a lot between year 12 and 13 to do this preparation and keep it regular. The first thing I would do is make sure that you know all the ideas and the content very well. So read the specification, evaluate the specification, make sure that you know all the content, make sure you fill any gaps, especially the paper two that you might not have seen before. Then based on this, if you have any gaps, you want to practice those. You want to practice the topics that you find harder and any that you think that you need to work on, any parts that you think that you might have gaps. Once you fill all those gaps, so once you feel very strong with the content and with solving, not just, I guess, knowing the ideas, because we've already said it's not just about knowing the ideas, it's about doing questions based on those. So once you know the ideas and you can think that you can approach difficult questions, then you want to just generally practice the problem solving approach. So doing lots of tricky maths questions, learning those tricks and techniques and trying to spot those patterns. And yeah, just practicing a lot and forming this kind of feedback loop. So you want to do problems, evaluate them, strengthen and fill the gaps. So figure out if you didn't get it right, figure out why didn't you get it right? Like what was it that you didn't see? Or if you did get it right, but it took you ages, think about like, was there an easy way? So this took me 10 minutes, but I was only supposed to take 3 minutes on it. So why did that take me so long? And you kind of want to keep going through this. And over time, if you follow this approach, you'll definitely improve and you'll see improvements in your score as you go. And then in terms of actually practicing for the exam, yeah, the past papers are the best thing to do. The chronological order is quite good because the later ones are probably more similar to the new syllabus. So you're kind of practicing, you're leaving the ones that are most similar to what you'll actually do um, closer to the actual exam. Um, and definitely do time management drills. So definitely try to sit these mock exams in a similar setting. Obviously, you can't perfectly recreate the environment of the test, but you can simulate it as best as possible, and that will help you deal with any friction on the day and reduce that. Yeah, so here's a list of key resources. I don't know whether this presentation will be available, but you can kind of make a note of these, or even maybe like if you want to just take a screenshot or something of this slide, these links. They are also, so this is directly from the TMUA website, most of these. So if you go on the TMUA website, you will see all of these links. So you have the full content specification, you have notes. So they publish notes of all the concepts that you need to know for paper one and for paper two. The paper two is probably the most relevant. And then they publish a bunch of past papers from the old spec, which will be not exactly the same as the format that you will see, but it will be the same sort of questions, so the same question styles, testing very similar topics. There are also two official mock tests which are online, and they're actually on the platform. Like you'll log on to it and see the test platform um, that you will see on the day. So those are very good to use. If I was going to use them now, I would probably use them now. Just flick through them, get a sense of what the platform looks like and feels like, and then save these, I guess, until closer to the exam. So actually take the mock tests maybe like 2 to 4 weeks before the exam, because those are what will give you the most realistic practice. And then the other resources that I like for the TMUA, which are other difficult maths admissions test style papers, are kind of the MAT. So the MAT is now not doesn't happen anymore, but it will be very useful for the same sort of question styles, like question styles that are testing A-level knowledge, but that the problems are harder and they're looking for your problem solving approach. Maths Olympiad and STEP, I would say, are not going to be really close to what the TMUA questions are like, but they're still testing the same sort of skills, so they're still good to practice. Just, I guess, keep in mind while you're doing them that the TMUA questions will be different. Probably slightly easier, to be honest. I'd say the TMUA questions are less severe or less difficult, in my opinion, to Olympia questions or to STEP questions. Okay, so we'll go through some example questions. So I've got 3 example questions here. I think Alison, do you think we have time for all of them? Are we all right with time at the moment?
Maybe we'll go through two, see how we go.
Yeah, okay.
What's your
So
favorite?
so this one's all right. This one's pretty good. So let's do this one, and then maybe we'll do the paper two one at the end to show some paper two stuff. So yeah, we want to find the length of this curve. So I'll let you all maybe have a think about this first for a bit, maybe like 1 or 2 minutes, just having a think about it. And maybe if you want to put your answer in the chat, then I can kind of see what everyone's thinking. No one else can see, so you can just put your answer there, and it's just me that can see this. But have a look at this question, have a think about how you might do it, and then in about a minute or so, we can go through the solution. Okay, we've got one answer in the chat so far. Anyone else got any ideas? Okay, so we've got a big range of answers so far. So some people thinking E, some people thinking F. Any other thoughts? Okay, so let's quickly go through this. So first thoughts on the question, I guess, is that it's weird. So it's asking you to find the length of a curve. This is something that you probably don't know how to do. There are lots of like mathematical ways you can do this using like calculus. However, for A levels and for the TMUA specification, you don't need to know any kind of complex ways of doing finding the length of a curve. So this is already a clue about this question. The clue, since you're not expected to like be able to derive like complex lengths of curves, I would say the clue for this is that it's actually going to be like a very straightforward shape that you should be probably familiar with. So you can see we can basically probably combine the logs together. So maybe we can go to the next slide and we'll see how to do this. So yeah, because we have lots of log-based tens, we can combine all this together and maybe get rid of the logs because the logs are complicating it at the moment. If we get rid of the logs, we get this expression. And expanding this out, you can hopefully recognize that it will be a circle. So the final result we get from expressing that all and simplifying all the steps is so we get a circle that's got a center at -5 and 1 and a radius of 6. Cool. So we might think based on this, obviously, it's a circle. So the length of the curve will just be 2 pi r. So we can kind of compute that. However, with a lot of these questions, so the TMUA is testing your mathematical thinking, and a big part of maths is to be rigorous and to consider all the different cases. So just be careful to consider whether this is actually the answer. So does anyone maybe think why? So I guess if we just do 2 pi r, so 2 pi r would just be 12 pi. I guess the answer would be F. Uh, do we think the answer is F, or is there any reasons why it might not be? If anyone has any idea why it might not be F, I'll give you a clue, it's not F. So if anyone has an idea why it might not be F, feel free to put it in the chat. Yes, exactly. So I see some answers regarding kind of the fact that we have logs in the original equation means that some of the values on the circle won't actually be part of this original function because they'll be undefined in the logs. So yeah, we need to check those. So on the next slide, I guess we check these. Yeah, so basically a log, the input of log always has to be positive. So we essentially need x to be always bigger than y. We need 2 to be always bigger than 2x and y to be always bigger than 5. So based based on this, sorry, y needs to be always, yeah, bigger than -5. So based on this, we have some inequalities, and we can use that to narrow down, I guess, the shape that we'll actually get. So we have this circle, but if we have these inequalities and if we need to satisfy them because of the logs, then we end up with, if we go to the next slide, yeah, this sort of thing. So obviously, I mean, just to go through this, so that some of these conditions don't really matter because they only regard one single point on the circle. So the condition for the 2 minus 2x and the y plus 5 only matter for a single point, so that's not going to really affect our length calculation. However, this one, the x having to be bigger than y, that affects multiple parts of the circle. So here's just on Desmos, like the graph of that. Obviously, in the exam you can't plot graphs, but this is what I was talking about earlier, where if you know how to sketch it, which this should be relatively easy to sketch because it's just a circle centered at a certain point. You can use the sketches to really get a good sense of what's happening and what how the functions are behaving and things like that. So actually, the length of this curve is only this red bit because it's only valid if x is bigger than y. So it would be 3 pi. Okay, let's go to number 3. So, okay, so number 3 then. So this is an example of what you might see in the paper 2. So it's not very, I mean, it doesn't look at face value like it's very mathematical. There's no numbers, there's no symbols. It's just kind of a logical statement. But I guess these sorts of ideas underpin all of mathematical reasoning. So we have a statement every day next week. Fred will do at least one maths problem, and then the question says, if the statement is not true, which of the following is certainly true? So similar to the last one, I'll give you about a minute just to consider this. And as we said before, put your answers in the chat and we'll talk about it. Okay, so we've got lots of E's, some B's, some F's. Okay. So I think we can kind of quickly go through this now. So for these types of questions, I would say you can just kind of brute force your way through it. Like you can try to really imagine the statement, and if you have quite a logical brain and like you can work through these, it is possible to get the answer without having to do any formal mathematical techniques or anything. I would say for the TMUA with the time pressure, that is very difficult. So it is definitely worth understanding the techniques you can use to formally do questions like this. And if you look in the notes that I had in the other slide for the paper two, they will discuss all of this in detail, like the different techniques, the different like formal ways that you can actually approach problems like this. So yeah, the way that we can do this formally, I guess, is to basically look at this statement and what's it saying. So in a general form, it's saying this statement for all x p. So it's saying for every case of x, there will be corresponding p. And we need to basically negate this if the statement is not true. So the negation of this is that there will be some x such that not p. And basically, then we just need to kind of go through and think about what that actually means in terms of the language. So if there exists x such that not p, obviously, what is x? X is the day. So there exists some day, and then p is Fred will do at least one math problem. So the answer should be there exists a day next week where he will not do at least one math problem. So I guess that it's E. So there's some day next week that he'll do no math problems. And that's the answer to that question. So there's lots of formal techniques, I guess, to go through and do these, and they can be tricky at first, but I think it's very much practicing. The more you do, definitely the easier that they'll get significantly. Right, yeah, thanks. That was all I had. I guess back to Alison.
Thank you so much, Jake. We have some questions. I have to do the very awkward bit. It wouldn't be a webinar if at some point I didn't slip in a bit of a sales pitch, but I'll keep this brief. We do work with students. We try to make as much available online as possible. But if you would like to work with a tutor one-to-one, sort of fast track your preparation, we do have various packages. And as a thank you for attending, we are including this discount code giving 10% off if you book before the end of May. Little QR code to take you directly there. And if you prefer to work as part of a group, an alternative to that is our online test day courses in June, August, and September. Also have a QR code there to take you directly to the test page. And we have our own learning materials, our own tests. We also, on these days, do timed mock tests so you could start to get a feel for what the real test will be like. If you would like any more information about that, give us a call. Or if you don't want to do that, give us an email and get in touch, and we'd be more than happy to help out. Let's just have a look at what we've got in the Q&A. We've got a question here. Are we allowed pen and paper to do rough working on? Yeah, you covered this with sometimes you're given laminated paper, almost like a kind of whiteboard. Sometimes you're given paper, it's a bit patchy,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. Yeah, so you're definitely given something to do your workings. You're not expected to do any of this in your head. But yeah, I've heard from most of my students that they give you these like almost whiteboards, but not really whiteboards. It's a piece of paper that's laminated, and they give you some whiteboard pens, and that's basically what you write on. And you can kind of request more if you need to. So I guess it's like paper, but it's not exactly paper. So it has caused a bit of friction with some of my past students, which I would say this is why I recommend to everyone who's taking the admissions test, try to replicate that environment. So even if you kind of go online, go on Amazon, see if you can buy like just a set of laminated sheets like that, or like thin whiteboards, and just get used to doing that, so that you're prepared for for every eventuality, and you're not caught off guard by anything.
Yeah, I think like psychologically being prepared for the unexpected is important.
Yeah.
Just so that you almost preempt any weird things going on. Or, we've heard of all sorts of dramas happen at test, and I'm sure it won't happen for you, but just stay calm. Know that there are mechanisms for, submitting letters and letting people know that if you've had real strong disruption in your test, but otherwise just be prepared for it and try to get on with the test as best as you can. We've got a nice question here about course choice. I'll just briefly answer that. So it's about the joint courses at Oxford, because I personally had studied maths and philosophy. I would say if you check out the syllabus of any course that you're looking at, you will see there's very often chance to take a paper in something outside of your course. For example, in maths at Oxford, you could take a history of maths paper and therefore do quite a bit of reading and essay writing to satisfy that curiosity. Same with Cambridge, an awful lot of flexible courses there to look at. So it may be that you want to go for a joint course, or you might be able to satisfy your particular interests, and might be surprised actually a single honours course offers flexibility. We've got a question about what is old versus new TMUA. You talked about papers up till 2023 being useful preparation, and since then they're not released, are they?
Yeah.
So
So
there's not a set paper as such.
yeah, so pre 2023 is the old one, and then everything post that, I guess, is the new one. But yeah, as Alison said, they do not release those. So there are some specimen tests. So that's the one that you can take kind of online. That's, I guess, the specimen paper, which is kind of designed to show you what it would be like, but it's not a real past paper. The real past papers are not released, unfortunately.
Question here about whether we'll be sending out the slides. Um, we absolutely will, and we'll be sending out the recording to everybody who has registered. So if you need any more information or you want to reflect on the slides, then those will be sent to you. We do have a couple of other questions which are more specific to people's circumstances. Please don't hesitate just to reach out to us. We're on the end of the phone and more than happy to interact with students who are looking ahead to this. Um, we'll be sending out the slides, so I think that satisfies some of our other questions, asking to review some of the questions again. But I just want to thank you, Jake, for your incredible insights here and some of your experiences, both as a student going through admissions testing, but also being on the other side and working with candidates who have a range of experiences. I wish everybody who's joined us tonight the best of luck. Try to enjoy this preparation and little and often, and you will thank yourself for it. So, thank you so much, everybody, and we will speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.